The rain had finally stopped, but the sky remained a dull, heavy gray, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The small church in the town of Millfield was packed with mourners, their whispers blending into a somber hum that filled the air like a distant, sorrowful song. At the center of it all was an open casket, surrounded by white roses, David Moore's final resting place, at least for today. He looked peaceful, dressed in a crisp black suit, his hands folded over his chest. Too peaceful, too still, the kind of stillness that makes the heart ache because it's unnatural, because it's wrong. He was only 34. Amara, his 5-year-old daughter, stood near the front pew, clutching a single white rose in her tiny hands. Her dark curls were tied back with a ribbon, her dress too formal, too stiff, like the grown-up clothes they'd forced her into for this grown-up tragedy. She didn't cry. Not yet. She just stared at her father, her big brown eyes wide with something between confusion and quiet devastation. She didn't understand why everyone kept saying he was gone. He was right there. She could see him. Why wouldn't he wake up? The priest's voice droned on, words about heaven and peace and memories. But Amara wasn't listening. Her small fingers tightened around the rose, the thorns biting into her skin just enough to remind her she was still here, still alive. When the ceremony paused for the final viewing, the crowd shifted, murmurs rising as people began to approach the casket one last time. Amara's aunt, Kendra, reached for her hand, but the little girl slipped away before she could stop her. No one expected what happened next. Amara ran to the casket, her shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor. Without hesitation, she climbed onto the step stool beside it, her small frame trembling as she leaned over the edge. Then, before anyone could react, she crawled inside. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone cried out. But Amara didn't care. She curled up against her father's chest, her tiny arms wrapping around him as if she could squeeze the life back into him. Her tears fell onto his suit, her whispers lost in the fabric of his clothes. "Daddy, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Please wake up." And then his finger twitched. It was slight, almost imperceptible. But the woman standing closest to the casket saw it. Her sharp intake of breath cut through the silence like a knife. Others noticed, too. The room erupted in hushed exclamations, voices overlapping in shock and disbelief. "Did you see that? It's just a reflex." No, I swear it moved." Amara didn't hear them. She only felt it, the faintest pressure against her back, like a hand gently pressing her closer. Her breath hitched. "Daddy?" she whispered. Then the moment was over. The funeral director rushed forward, gently lifting Amara out of the casket. As she kicked and sobbed, her small hands reaching for her father one last time. The lid was closed. The service ended. The crowd dispersed, shaken, some convinced they'd imagined it, others whispering about miracles. But that night, as Kendra tucked Amara into bed, the little girl looked up at her with eyes too old for her face and said, "Auntie Ken, Daddy's not gone. He's still here." And that's when the real mystery began. The days after the funeral were heavy with an eerie quiet, the kind that settles in when the world feels off balance, like a photograph tilted just slightly to the left. Kendra did her best to keep things normal, pouring cereal into bowls, turning on cartoons, tucking Amara in at night with the same bedtime stories she'd always loved. But nothing was normal anymore. Amara didn't laugh at the cartoons. She didn't ask for seconds of her favorite, snacks. She just sat, her little hands clutching a stuffed rabbit David had given her, her eyes distant, as if she were listening to something, or someone, Kendra couldn't hear. Then, one evening, as Kendra washed dishes, she heard Amara whispering, in the living room. Not the usual make-believe chatter of a child playing alone, but a low, steady murmur, like a conversation. Kendra turned off the faucet, holding her breath, straining to listen. Amara's voice was soft but clear. "I know, Daddy. I'll tell her." A chill crawled up Kendra's spine. She stepped into the doorway, her hands still damp, and saw Amara sitting cross-legged on the rug, crayons scattered around her, a half-finished drawing in her lap. The little girl didn't look up, just kept coloring with intense focus, her tiny brow furrowed. "Amara," Kendra said carefully, "who are you talking to?" Amara finally lifted her gaze, her expression eerily calm. "Daddy," she said, simply as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "He says you forgot to check the mail today." Kendra's stomach dropped. She had forgotten. She'd been so distracted with funeral arrangements and calls from well-meaning relatives that the mailbox had slipped her mind entirely. She forced a smile, her voice wavering. "That's just a lucky guess, sweetheart." But Amara shook. Her head, her eyes too knowing for a child her age. "No, he told me." Then she held up her drawing, and Kendra's breath caught. It wasn't the usual stick figures and rainbows. It was a detailed sketch of a man in a lab coat, standing in front of a burning building, his face scribbled out in black. At the bottom, in Amara's uneven handwriting, were words that made Kendra's blood run cold. They made him go away. That night, Kendra couldn't sleep. She paced the house, her mind racing. Was this grief? A child's way of coping? Or something else? She ended up in David's old study, a room she'd avoided since his death, the air still faintly smelling of his cologne. She ran her fingers over his desk, the stacks of papers, the framed photo of him and Amara at the beach. Then her gaze landed on his chess set, the one he'd taught Amara to play on. Something nagged at her. A memory of Amara earlier that day, pointing to the attic door and saying, "Daddy wants you to look." Kendra hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, with the drawing burning a hole in her thoughts, she climbed the attic stairs, her pulse loud in her ears. The space was cluttered with old holiday decorations and dusty boxes, but one thing stood out. David's old army trunk, tucked in the corner. She hadn't seen him open it in years. Kneeling, she popped the latches, the hinges creaking. Inside, beneath a pile of old letters, was a small, unmarked box. Her hands trembled as she lifted the lid. There, nestled in foam padding, was a flash drive. She didn't know what she'd find. But as she plugged it into her laptop and the files loaded, one name jumped out at her again and again. Vespera Biotech. The glow of the laptop screen cast eerie shadows across the walls as Kendra scrolled through the files, her fingers trembling against the keyboard. The documents were a labyrinth of medical reports, encrypted emails, and surveillance photos. Some of David himself, taken from a distance, as if he'd been followed. One folder stood out. Project Pale Horse. Inside were clinical trial records for an experimental drug, VX-209, with side effects listed in chilling detail. Seizures, organ failure, death. But what made Kendra's stomach twist was the patient roster. Names, ages, addresses. And there, halfway down the list, was Amara's. Her breath hitched. 2 years ago, Amara had suddenly fallen ill. High fevers, unexplained bruises, days spent in the hospital while doctors ran tests and whispered in hushed tones. They'd called. It, a rare blood disorder, said it was manageable with medication. But David had never believed them. He'd grown withdrawn, spending nights locked in his study, coming home with shadows under his eyes. Now Kendra understood why. The dates matched. The symptoms matched. Vespera had been testing their drug on children, and Amara was one of them. A video file labeled Last Resort caught her eye. She clicked it. David's face filled the screen, his expression grim, the camera shaking slightly as if he'd set it, up in a hurry. "If you're watching this, something happened to me," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Kendra, listen. Vespera's covering up the deaths. Kids are dying and they're bribing officials to bury it. I've got proof. Bank transfers, emails, everything. It's all on here." He rubbed his temples, his exhaustion palpable. Amara's sickness wasn't random. They targeted families who wouldn't fight back, single parents, low-income households. But when I started asking questions, they noticed. A noise off camera made him flinch. "Hide this. Don't trust the police. Some of them are on Vespera's payroll. And Kendra, if I don't make it, tell Amara." The video cut abruptly to static. Kendra sat frozen, her pulse roaring in, her ears. David's car accident. The way the police had rushed to call it a case of brake failure. The way the coroner had avoided her eyes at the funeral. It wasn't an accident. They'd murdered him. A floorboard creaked behind her. She whirled around, slamming the laptop shut. Amara stood in the doorway, her stuffed rabbit dangling from one hand, her eyes wide and unblinking. "Daddy says you're scared," she whispered. "But he's here. He says to look under the red tile." Kendra's mouth went dry. "What? Red tile, honey?" Amara pointed to the kitchen, where the cookies hide. The cookie jar. David's stupid, gaudy, red-tiled cookie jar, the one he'd bought as a joke because Amara loved sneaking treats from it. Kendra rushed to the kitchen, her hands shaking as she lifted the lid. Beneath a stack of chocolate chip cookies was a folded piece of paper. A list of names. Doctors, judges, a senator, and beside each one, an amount. Payments, hush money, itsukuindai. Next morning, Kendra called the only person she could think of. Ryan Carter, David's old college roommate and an investigative journalist now working for the Boston Globe. When she told him what she'd found, the line went silent for a long moment. "Jesus," he finally said. "Meet me, but not here, somewhere public. And Kendra, bring Amara. They might be watching your house." As she hung up, Amara tugged her sleeve. "Auntie Ken," she said, her voice eerily calm. "The bad men are coming." Outside, a black sedan slowed to a stop in front of their house. The black sedan idled at the curb, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside, the engine humming with a low, threatening purr that made the hairs on Kendra's neck stand on end. She grabbed Amara's hand and yanked her away from the window, her mind racing. Were they here for the files? Were they here to finish what they started with David? Amara didn't resist, her tiny fingers gripping Kendra's tightly, her face eerily calm, as if she'd expected this. "Daddy says to go out the back," she whispered, her voice steady in a way that sent a shiver down Kendra's spine. There was no time to question it. Kendra snatched the flash drive, shoved it deep into her pocket, and scooped Amara into her arms, her heart hammering as she bolted through the kitchen and out the back door just as the front doorbell rang. Once, twice, then a sharp, impatient knock that sounded more like a demand than a request. The backyard was small, fenced in, but the gate leading to the neighbor's yard was unlocked, and Kendra didn't hesitate, ducking low as she sprinted through, her sneakers slipping on the damp grass. She could hear voices now, muffled but urgent, and the crunch of footsteps circling the house. Amara clung to her, her breath warm against Kendra's neck, her little body trembling, but she didn't cry, didn't scream, just held on, as if she knew exactly how dangerous silence needed to be. They cut through 3 backyards before Kendra dared to slow down, her lungs burning, her arms aching from carrying Amara's weight. A bus stop stood on the corner, its bench empty. The schedule faded with time. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers slick with sweat, and dialed Ryan again. "They're at the house," she hissed the second he picked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know who they are, but they're looking for us." Ryan's response was instant, his tone sharp with urgency. "Listen carefully. There's a diner called Marty's on 5th and Elm. It's always crowded. Go there, blend in, and wait for me. Do not talk to anyone. Do not use your cards. They can track that. I'm 20 minutes out." Kendra nodded, though he couldn't see her, and hung up, her hands shaking as she tucked the phone away. Amara looked up at her, her dark eyes too knowing, too old for her face. "Daddy says they're the men from the fire," she murmured, her voice distant, as if she were repeating something whispered in her ear. "The ones who hurt the kids." Kendra's stomach twisted. The drawing, the lab coat, the burning building. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but there was no time. Just the bus pulling up with a hiss of brakes, its doors creaking open like an invitation. The diner was a relic of the 1950s, all cracked vinyl booths and the smell of stale coffee, but it was packed with lunchtime chatter, the clatter of plates and silverware creating a wall of noise that felt strangely safe. Kendra chose a booth in the back, her back to the wall, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. Amara sat across from her, swinging her legs, her gaze fixed on the salt shaker as if it held secrets. A waitress dropped off 2 menus, barely, glancing at them, and Kendra forced herself to breathe, to think. The flash drive weighed heavy in her pocket. David's voice echoed in her head. "Don't trust the police." But Ryan wasn't police. Ryan was family. Wasn't he? The bell above. The door jingled. Kendra's head snapped up. A man in a suit walked in, his sunglasses hiding his eyes, his posture too stiff, too alert. Her pulse spiked. Had they been followed? The man scanned the diner, his gaze lingering a beat too long on the booths near the back. On them. Kendra's hand tightened around her knife, her mind racing. Should they run? Was there even a back exit? Then Amara spoke, her voice barely audible over the din. "Daddy says to look under the table." Kendra frowned but obeyed, her fingers brushing, against something taped beneath the edge, a small folded slip of paper. She peeled it free, her heart in her throat, and unfolded it. 2 words, in handwriting that wasn't David's, but that she recognized instantly from his old case files. Ryan's compromised. The man in the suit took a step toward them. Amara's hand shot out, gripping Kendra's wrist. "He's lying," she whispered. "Daddy says run, now." Kendra didn't hesitate. In one fluid motion, she grabbed Amara's arm, tossed a $20 bill onto the table, and yanked the little girl toward the kitchen doors at the back of the diner. The man in the suit lunged forward, knocking over a chair as he shouted something unintelligible, but the noise of the diner swallowed his words. The kitchen staff barely looked up as Kendra burst through the swinging doors, her pulse roaring in her ears. Just a blur of stainless steel and steam, the clatter of pans, a chef's startled curse as she shoved past him. A back exit loomed. Ahead, sunlight bleeding through the small window in the door. She hit the push bar hard, stumbling into an alleyway littered with overflowing dumpsters and the sour stench of rotting food. Amara's sneakers slapped against the wet pavement as they ran, her breath coming in quick, frightened bursts, but she kept up, her small hand gripping Kendra's like a vice. They zigzagged through side streets, Kendra's mind racing. Ryan was compromised. Had he betrayed them? Or was he in danger too? She couldn't trust him now, couldn't trust anyone. The flash drive burned in her pocket. They needed to disappear. A subway entrance yawned ahead, and she dragged Amara down the steps, their shadows stretching long under the flickering fluorescent lights. The platform was crowded, commuters, tourists, a group of teenagers laughing too loud. Kendra pulled Amara close, her eyes scanning the signs. Where could they go? A train rumbled in, brakes screeching, and she made a split-second decision, shoving through the closing doors just in time. The car was packed, bodies pressed together, and Kendra used the crowd to their advantage, maneuvering Amara into a corner where they could both catch their breath. Amara's face was pale, her lower lip trembling, but her voice was eerily steady when she spoke. Daddy says the bad men have a list. They're looking for the kids from the pictures. Kendra crouched to her level, her hands tight on the little girl's shoulders. What pictures, sweetheart? Amara blinked, her gaze drifting to something over Kendra's shoulder, something only she could see. The ones in the fire? The kids with the tubes in their arms. A cold knot formed in Kendra's stomach. The clinical trial photos. The children hooked up to machines. Oh, God. The train lurched to a stop. More passengers flooded in, and Kendra caught a glimpse of a familiar suit near the far end of the car. No, 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 no. She turned Amara's face into her chest, shielding her, but it was too late. The man's head snapped toward them, his mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Kendra's grip tightened. Next stop. They had to get off. The doors opened. A surge of people moved toward the exit, and Kendra melted into the crowd, keeping her head down, her body between Amara and the man now shoving his way toward them. The platform was chaos. A street performer's guitar, a baby wailing, the sharp scent of pretzels from a vendor's cart. She ducked behind a pillar, her breath ragged. They couldn't keep running. They needed a plan. Amara tugged her sleeve. "Daddy says to find the lady with the yellow bag," she whispered. Kendra scanned the crowd. Near the ticket machine stood a woman in a denim jacket, a bright yellow tote slung over her shoulder. She was older, her silver hair in a braid, her face kind. Who the hell was she? But Amara was already pulling Kendra toward her, her steps sure, as if she'd done this before. The woman turned. Her eyes locked onto Amara, then Kendra. And then she said the last thing Kendra expected. "I've been waiting for you. David sent me." The woman's words hit Kendra like a punch to the chest. "David sent me." For a moment, the noise of the subway station faded. The screech of train wheels, the garbled announcements over the loudspeaker, even the panicked drumming of her own heartbeat, all of it drowned out by those three impossible words. Amara didn't hesitate. She slipped her tiny hand into the woman's outstretched palm as if she'd known her forever, as if this were all part of some unspoken plan. Kendra's instincts screamed at her to snatch Amara back, to run. But then, the woman leaned down and murmured something that froze her in place. The chessboard in the attic. The knight was always his favorite piece. A code. A confirmation. Something only David would have said. The woman, Elena, she introduced herself, led them through a maze of back streets, her pace brisk but unhurried, her yellow bag swinging like a beacon. Every few steps, Kendra glanced over her shoulder, expecting to see the suited man or worse, but the streets were eerily empty. Elena didn't speak until they reached a narrow brownstone, its stoop cracked with age, ivy crawling up the brick. Inside, the air smelled of lavender and old books. The living room was cluttered but warm, a knitting project abandoned on the couch, a steaming teapot on the coffee table, as if she'd been expecting them. Maybe she had. "Sit," Elena said, pressing a mug into Kendra's shaking hands. "You're safe here. For now." Amara curled up in an armchair, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, her eyes drifting shut. She looked so small, so exhausted. Elena watched her for a long moment, then sighed. "David reached out to me a month before he died. Said if anything happened to him, you'd need help. That she nodded at Amara, would start remembering things." Kendra's throat tightened. Remembering what? Elena's gaze was steady. The trials, the children, the way Vespera made sure no one could talk. She reached into her yellow bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were photos, dozens of them. Children in hospital beds, their faces blurred but their arms lined with IVs. A lab, its walls scorched. And then a list. Names. So many names. Kendra's vision swam. Near the bottom, circled in red, was Amara's. "They didn't just test on these kids," Elena said quietly. "They changed them. Small doses of a compound designed to enhance neuroplasticity, supposedly to cure degenerative diseases. But it had side effects." She hesitated. Some of the children began reporting things, visions, voices, as if their minds were tuned to frequencies the rest of us can't hear. A cold realization slithered through Kendra. Amara's drawings, her whispers, the way she knew things she shouldn't. She turned to look at her niece, now asleep, her chest rising and falling gently. "You're saying she can—" "What? Communicate with David? That's impossible." Elena's smile was sad. "Is it? Then how did she lead you to me?" Outside, a car door slammed. Elena's head snapped up. She moved to the window, peering through the curtains, then cursed under her breath. "They're here." Kendra shot to her feet. "Who? How?" Elena was already shoving the folder back into her bag. "Doesn't matter. There's a back exit. Go." She pressed a key into Kendra's palm. "Storage Unit 114 at the bus depot. Everything you need is there. And Kendra?" Her voice dropped. "Don't trust anyone else." A fist pounded on the front door. Amara jolted awake, her eyes wide and frightened. Kendra didn't think, just grabbed her and ran. The back door led to a tiny courtyard, then an alley. Behind them, glass shattered. A shout. But Kendra didn't look back. They ran until the sky opened up above them, until the only sound was their own ragged breathing. And then, in the stillness, Amara whispered the words that changed everything. "Daddy says it's time to show the world." The bus depot storage unit was smaller than Kendra expected. Just a concrete cube with a roll-up metal door that shrieked in protest when she twisted the key. Inside, dust motes swirled in the slanted afternoon light, illuminating stacks of file boxes and a single, ancient-looking laptop perched atop a plastic crate. Amara darted in first, her small fingers immediately going to a shoebox labeled in David's messy handwriting. For A. Inside were crayon drawings, dozens of them, all variations of the same terrifying scenes. Flames, men in masks, children, crying. And in every single one, a shadowy figure with no face, watching from the corners. Kendra's hand shook as she booted up the laptop. The login screen demanded a password. She tried Amara's birthday, David's birthday. Nothing worked. "Try Pale Horse," Amara said quietly without looking up from the drawings. The screen unlocked. Files upon files, video confessions from former Vespera employees, scanned medical records with damning redactions, even a list of every child who'd died in the trials. But the most chilling find was a live feed link, time-stamped for that very night at 9 p.m. EST, labeled Broadcast Protocol. David had rigged a dead man's switch. If anything happened to him, the truth would go viral automatically, unless someone manually stopped it. Kendra's phone buzzed. An unknown number. The text was brief. "You have 2 hours to hand over the drive. Or she dies like her father." Amara touched the screen, her tiny finger hovering over the Initiate Now button. "Daddy says they're scared," she murmured. "That's why they're hiding." Outside, tires screeched, doors slammed. They were out of time. Kendra made her choice. She hit the button. Across the country, in newsrooms and living rooms and government offices, screens flickered to life with Vespera's darkest secrets. The CEO's private emails admitting to the cover-ups, the senator accepting bribes, the footage of trial subject 12, a 6-year-old boy, seizing uncontrollably as doctors stood by, taking notes, and then the final clip, David's last recording. "If you're seeing this, they killed me," he said, blood trickling from his temple, the camera shaking as he hid in what looked like a parking garage. But Amara, she's the key. The compound they gave her? It didn't just enhance her mind. It bridged something, a connection beyond death. She can see them, the ones we lost. Listen to her, protect her, and for God's sake, burn it all down. The screen went black. Silence. Then, chaos. News alerts exploded across phones. Protests erupted outside Vespera headquarters. The stock price plummeted in real time. And in a quiet storage unit, Kendra clutched Amara tight as the little girl hummed a lullaby, one David used to sing, her eyes fixed on the empty corner of the room. "He's smiling now," she whispered. 1 year later, the memorial park was crowded with families. Children laughed around the bronze statue of David holding Amara's hand, their faces streaked with sunlight. Kendra watched from a bench as Amara, now vibrant, healthy, placed white roses at the base. The trials were over. The guilty were in prison. The world had moved on. But sometimes when the wind rustled through the trees, Kendra could have sworn she heard it. A man's voice whispering just one word. Always.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.